back with Level Up, and I now have sound and don't look like a mime, which is fantastic. Thank you for being patient with us for a second there as we cut a few things over on the back end. I'm stoked and excited for this next talk. Chloé Messdaghi has been an incredible advocate for the hacker community, been phenomenal to work with around issues of hacker rights and so on. And she's someone who I believe just really understands what we're trying to get done as a community and the need for clarity and understanding at the interface between hackers and the organizations that are getting our input. So today her talk is on hackers don't wear black hoodies, they wear capes. And I'm super excited to hear from Chloé and Sherlock. Take it away.
Well, thank you guys. And thanks, Casey, for the introduction. This is Sherlock. I thought that we might want to see a puppy before we dive into the gritty parts of the legality of being a hacker. So this is Sherlock. Enjoy the moment as you guys can. She's being very good right now by sitting on my lap. All right, now let's go and deep dive into my slides. I'm gonna have Sherlock come down. All right. So before I get started, I just wanted to show my face so you guys can see me. I'm going to turn off my camera and then I'm going to do my slides so I can focus on my presentation. And I promise I'll put my camera on after it. All right, here we go. Can you all see my slides?
Yep, you're good.
Oh wait, wrong button. Let's try that again. Cool. So welcome to Hackers Don't Wear Black Hoodies, They Wear Capes. And you're probably wondering what? I own a black hoodie though. Yeah, I know, but don't worry. We're gonna get into it, trust me. So who am I? My name is Chloé Messdaghi. I'm the VP of Strategy over at Point3 Security. And when I'm not doing that, I'm an ethical hacker advocate, meaning I'm trying to fight for rights for the community in ways of bringing diversity and inclusion, to also making sure that we have new legislation and to update our press or marketing, in other words, the media. What exactly is a hacker? When I'm not doing that, I'm the president and co-founder of WoSEC, which is Women of Security. We have chapters all over the world. I'm also the founder of WomenHackerz, and actually this month is our 1-year anniversary. So basically it's non-binary and women around the world hacking at all levels, and we're all together running the show. It's a lot of fun. When I'm not that, I'm the podcaster for ITSP Magazine, The Uncommon Journey with Phil Wiley. You probably know of him, and Alyssa Miller. And when I'm not doing that, I run a hacker book club that meets every Tuesday at 5 p.m. And right now we are covering Connected Cars from Alyssa Knight. So every month we read a book that was written by a hacker in the community, and the hacker community reads them. It's a lot of fun, and we actually have the authors join us. Feel free to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I just went back on Instagram recently, so feel free to. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. So the agenda is the following. We're going to dive a little bit into the current landscape. Also, why so scared? In other words, why is everyone scared? And then how we can influence the public, the role that media, orgs, and legislation plays, and then some next steps. And yes, that is Sherlock. Oop. Oh, hold on one sec. All right. So the current landscape, let's just first talk about Equifax, okay? I'm pretty sure for some of you guys, it impacted you at a certain point, or someone was impacted by it. But overall, 6 months before it came out in the news of the breach, it was actually a security researcher that notified the company about the vulnerability. But Equifax didn't patch it. Only after the massive breach made headlines, that's when they did. And then we have Capital One case. So basically what happened was that according to the federal complaint, this breach took place in stages across March and April 2019. But Capital One only became aware of the problem on July 17th when a security researcher tipped the company to a public GitHub page that was displaying something that looked awfully like private Capital One data. But let's be honest, what happened if no one actually reported it? And you might find that person in the corner familiar. That's Amy Elazari. She was kind of like the first person that really got me interested in knowing about Safe Harbor, but also about the data that she collected about security researchers and why they weren't reporting vulnerabilities. And honestly, the reason 60% don't report vulnerabilities is this fear of being prosecuted. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So why are hackers scared? Besides prosecution, looking for contact information, reading policies have been a burden to reporting vulns. And this is one of those cases, and I love to talk about this one. For example, you might know DJI, but they do drones. And so they decided they wanted to create their own bug bounty program. And when they did, they didn't really know what they were doing either. So basically what happened was this person that you see on the screen, Kevin basically messaged them asking to confirm the scope. And it took 2 weeks for them to respond. And when they respond, he knows that the vulnerability that he wanted to report was something within scope. So he reported the vulnerability. And believe it or not, he was actually provided $30,000 for the finding. However, the agreement of receiving the funds offered no legal protection for him. So he walked away. What happened then was that, believe it or not, DJI basically were messaging internally that this guy's a threat for their PR and that they need to sue him. And so the thing is, they didn't understand was that when they responded to him, that was part of the chain. So he was able to see all those messages. And so he did receive a lawsuit tied to the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, claiming that he went out of scope. And regardless of the fact that he actually made sure to confirm what was in scope before reporting. So at this point, he was like, well, forget this. You know what? I'm just going to post everything. So he shared all these emails, even this letter on his blog post showing and detailing what went down for someone who went within scope. Now, the thing to note is that we're in a weird situation. And it's a weird situation because even when we are within scope, we can still be concerned about being prosecuted. And it's not just that, but even though government agencies are starting to trust hackers by having hacked the Pentagon, hacked the Army, hacked the Navy, and so on, the problem is that there's still no legislation changes that have happened yet that actually supports ethical hackers. But also, there's a lot of companies out there that are really afraid of doing a vulnerability disclosure program or even putting down their contact information for someone to report a vulnerability because they're scared. So the big takeaway on this is that everyone is scared. Organizations are scared of hackers reporting anything. Government is scared of hackers because they might do something. And overall, it's kind of sad, because we are in this situation basically driven by fear, and nothing's changing because of fear. So we're going to dive a little bit into this fear base and why is that? But I know this is a scary subject, so here are some puppies to lift your spirit. And I did place a cat for cat lovers as well, because we need to practice inclusion. Can you spot the cat? I know it's a little tricky sometimes. All right, next slide. So I want to talk about a little bit about how do we process this fear? Well, if you see over here, ethical hackers are not malicious actors, yet they're being seen and treated as such. And because of this, it reduces the chance of reporting vulnerability and could cause hackers to go to the dark side because they're seen as the same. So to the left is what you see when typing in criminal hackers, and to the right is what you see when you type in ethical hackers. Once again, hoodie and darkness. And it doesn't just stop there at the imagery. It's also the language used in the media. So when I say media, remember it's marketing and press. So we're also dealing with a situation with certain words that are being used, and also images of what a hacker looks like. And no, these are not correct. So how does this imagery and language impact us? Well, first of all, it does continue to feed the fear and the stereotypes and biases that exist through social construction. But really, how does that work? So we're going to dive a little bit quickly on your brain. And for those that know and see my talks, I usually always mention the brain because I'm obsessed with it. And also it's good to know if you're a social engineer. All right, so I want you to look at this lovely diagram here. And I want you to focus on that green shade area, the temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe is where you basically stem your memories. Your emotions are connected to these memories, these visual cues. But also within the temporal lobe is the hippocampus and amygdala in there. So the hippocampus takes in short-term memories and makes it long-term memories. And your amygdala is a fight versus flight mechanism. Now, the amygdala is one that is really important to understand because that is where your emotions are usually controlled and is usually subconscious. So the amygdala is an almond-shaped section of nervous tissue located in the temporal side lobe of the brain, which is responsible for your emotions, survival instincts, and memories. But just note that you cannot control it because this is completely subconscious. Only the prefrontal can. So I want to talk a little bit about how does this work? Well, think about it this way. You see an image of someone with pink hair. And I'm sorry if you have pink hair. There's nothing against you having pink hair. It's just an example I tend to use. So imagine you see someone with pink hair. Now, I want you to think of, say, for example, when you were a little kid, you had a teacher, an adult, even in the news and the media, you saw that people with pink hair are dangerous individuals. They steal, they do all these terrible things. And so now you've been programmed basically to fear this. This is what's called a socially constructed belief. It's something that we've been told, and we now are programmed in our brain that that is the way life works. So what happens is that when you do see someone with pink hair, you might, hold your bag a little bit closer to you. You might cross the street to avoid the person with pink hair because you think that they are a huge threat. So I want you to think about this. The person with pink hair, that's how other people are seeing hackers. When they find out that they're hackers, they're really scared. I don't know if you noticed, but anytime you say, I am a hacker or I work with hackers, usually the other party, their eyes bulge out a little bit. They take a step back, their mouth might drop. I mean, it's very awkward suddenly because now they're like, I don't know if I can trust you. Aren't you a criminal then? So it's very interesting to deal with that. But the thing is that the main takeaway is that socially constructed beliefs can always be challenged. So if you go to the pink side of the brain, so on the left side right there, the frontal lobe, I want you to pay attention to that. That is where the prefrontal cortex lays. So basically when someone sees a threat, the amygdala sends a message to the prefrontal cortex of your brain, alerting it, warning, warning, person is near you who is dangerous. So are you going to act on this? And so the prefrontal cortex of your brain acts like the CEO. It tells it whether or not it can keep going forward with the threat or to reduce it. So the good news is that, like I said, socially constructed beliefs can always be questioned. And so what we need to do is try to convince the public to understand that we are no longer a threat, but we're there as, the everyday superhero protecting them. So now the rest of the conversation I want to have is, how do we go about doing that? How do we change public opinion? Because right now we are in a situation that needs to change immediately. Because what's happened is that 93% of Forbes Global 2000 still don't have a vulnerability disclosure policy. 60% of hackers do not report any vulnerabilities, and that's usually out of fear of prosecution. And laws that prevent good hacking, like CFA and DMCA, those things exist. And we are still prosecuting ethical hackers, which is the saddest part, because even if they're within scope, they still have to be concerned about this and be eaten alive with insomnia too. And last but not least, this is increasing the number of malicious hackers. And I don't like to say malicious hackers, I would just say black hat actors or attackers. But overall, what I you're probably actually wondering about that whole thing about how does that increase the number? Well, let me tell you. From interviewing black hat hackers, one of the reasons they decided to move away from ethical hacking is the pay and the constant worry of being prosecuted, regardless if they did something legal. This is also said similarly for those that switch from being a black hat hacker to an ethical hacker. The reason they switched was the insomnia of being arrested, because there are cases when organizations prosecute ethical hackers, regardless if they were in scope. So that is why we're still dealing with that today. But overall, I want to take away from this slide is it's the mindset set by society, by people, and the media that's keeping us unsafe and preventing hackers what they do well. So now I want to talk a little bit about worldwide legislation. You can find this in every country pretty much. And yes, this is US-centric, the CFA and DMCA, but just note that those two you can find in your own country as well. So if you're in Canada, guess what? It's not called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It's just called the Copyright Act. But let me talk a little bit about these. So what exactly is the anti-hacking law? Well, an anti-hacking law is basically a law that prohibits accessing a computer without authorization or in excess of authorization. And this is usually used when a researcher goes out of scope. This is the act used to prosecute hacking. A really cool fact that I actually found out from Casey Ellis, who did my wonderful intro, he shared with me that one of the things is that the CFA came about because Ronald Reagan watched war games. And he basically kind of freaked out and was like, we got to do something about these hackers. They're going to do terrible things to us. So yeah, it's a great fact to know. Now, what is the anti-circumvention laws? So anti-circumvention laws are basically the right to repair. So reverse engineering is seen as a breach of property to some companies. Now, who here in a room has ever read the terms and conditions for an Apple product? Yeah. I'm thinking crickets right now because let's be real. I tried, I got bored. I decided to watch a movie instead. It probably was war games, but in general, they can be long and too much verbiage. It can confuse anyone, especially if English is not their first language. This can lead to some serious miscommunication issues for ethical hackers that don't really speak English. But overall, I want the main takeaway to be from the slide is that clearly these laws are old and out of date, and honestly, were created out of fear, not empathy, by taking the time to understand what is needed and why law should only prosecute malicious actors, aka criminals, and not good hackers. Overall, there are laws out there right now, and the laws are preventing good hacking the same way that they're preventing bad hacking, and we need good hacking. So how are we going to do that? Remember I was talking about the brain, that we need to change things? Yeah. Because what we really need right away is improvements to legislation. Because with improvements to legislation, we can change the previous slide. But in order to do that, we must dive into 3 categories in which we kind of touched on, because we need to work together to bring about public change. So how do we influence the public? Well, that is the question that everyone has. But in order to have rights for hackers, we need to get the public on board. In order to do so, we need to dive into 3 categories: organization, media, legislation. You need the press to push for public to become aware. In other words, we need to change the language and imagery of a hacker and start to use cyber criminals for those that commit unethical hacking. Overall, really separate the two. And I tend to do this often. So if I see someone on LinkedIn post something about hackers when they really mean cyber criminals, I do correct them. And you should do it too, because it's fun. And that's the only way we're going to learn. Also, in order to help the press, we need organizations to get on board with bilateral trust, with having vulnerability disclosure programs. By showing that they support hackers, the public changes their view in general. And if you're wondering what are organizations, these are companies, these are nonprofits, and so on. And lastly, to have organizations and public opinion to push and motivate Capitol Hill to get on board and update current legislation that will protect ethical hackers. That is going to be the hardest, but the only way we're going to get legislation to change is really getting the media and organizations on board. So we need media to report the real things. Don't use hackers when you mean attackers. We need organizations to have vulnerability disclosure programs, because that's the only way we're going to build trust, and also to prevent from them not finding out that they have a vulnerability later down the road because some massive breach. So overall, we need all 3 of these to have hacker rights. So the 5 needs is we just overall need to push for awareness of ethical hackers. And the 5 needs here is how we could get there. These are things we need to make sure we do. So the first step together is I created this petition at the end of February, and it's broken down into 3 different parts. So basically what we've talked about today. For organizations, I'm asking for them when they sign this, that they implement policies that clearly define what's in scope. If any, what kind of rewards, contact information. I don't know about you, but sometimes it takes hours, days, weeks to find someone's contact information when you want to report something. And then you get to the point where it's like, should I take this risk still? Also having communicate updates on the submission. I know many of you guys that do bug bounty, sometimes it drives you up the wall when you're like, so have they fixed it? What's going on? What's going on with the submission? I want to know. So I feel you on that. Updates would be great. Also have an extension of bilateral trust to include non-retribution, which is the most important thing because we need to build that bilateral trust, and it's going to take both of us to trust each other. And for that, I really recommend checking out disclose.io. It is definitely down in the notes down below on that front. Now, also asking politicians to get to know ethical hackers instead of seeing them as cyber criminals, and to support them by pushing forward new legislation and protective additions to current legislation that won't penalize them. So this is one of those important things because we really do need politicians to know more about the infosec community because many of them don't, unfortunately. And what they do is politicians watch the news. And so we need to change, once again, we need press to actually report differently on the imagery and the terms that they use. This will help us out in the end. And like I said, we also need the media to be in there. So to stop portraying ethical hackers as malicious actors, such change the imagery because that's the problem. Because I don't know about you, but it's really annoying when you see those cutout ski masks images because the only thing that goes through my mind is I have sensitive skin. If I'm wearing a ski mask, I'm going to be itching like crazy underneath that. And the most annoying part about that is like, that's not going to help me on my focusing at all. So it's one of those things that you wish for these things to change because they don't make sense. Also, you can always cover your camera on your computer. So you really don't need to show this anymore. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, that's enough of my rant on that front. But let's go into what else. Now, the most important thing to take away from here, I need you guys to do something for me, which is I need you guys to sign this saying that you promise to stay within scope and not exploit. Yes, I know there are times where you mistakenly go out of scope, and that's all right. But just note that please don't exploit because I have people contacting me saying, hey, I found this vulnerability. And the next question I ask is like, did you exploit it? And then they're like, yes. And that's a problem. So don't do that. Because that is when companies start losing trust in the hacker community. And that's when they're like, you know what, I'm going to take down this contact information so that they don't come and contact me anymore. So make sure to know this, that when trust is broken with one of us, it breaks the trust with all of us. And yes, please sign that. So the main takeaways on this is ethical hackers deserve protection and rights. You guys deserve protection and rights because what you're doing is fabulous work. You're protecting people. You're protecting parents. You're protecting your kids in the future. You're protecting other people's kids in the future. You're also protecting everyone right now. The people that are trying to make a difference in this world, they need you more than ever. And all we can ask for is for protection and rights. We also need to work together on changing the current imagery and language that's being used to mislead the public. And we need to work together to change the public's perception by updating legislation, media, and organizations. And last but not least, please sign and share that petition. It's really important. And also check out disclose.io. It's a really good thing to note that there's a bunch of people that are working together to try to showcase that these companies are starting to trust the hacker community more than ever before. And those are the ones that, if I were you, I would want to hack on, to be honest, because I know that they respect me, in other words. And feel free to share this talk. But most importantly, I just want to say that change starts with you and me. What does that mean? That means looking at ourselves and understanding, what am I doing that's making the situation better or worse? And then asking questions on how to improve it. So asking, how can I make this better, is going to be really fundamental for us to change the situation. So please note that the change does start with you and me, always. And here are some resources. Feel free to take a photo of it or whatnot. It has the podcast that I'm in, the Hacker Book Club link. We're on Goodreads. The Hacker Rights petition, which is also pinned to my Twitter page. So feel free to sign in and share on that. Disclose.io. I mean it. Check it out. It's something that's really needed, and it's a perfect time to have right now. Now, the last four, that's just for those, if you are in the US, this is really important to note. These are some really good resources for those that are dealing with COVID-19 situations. We're all stuck at home. And I know it can be really hard on mental health, but just note that these are really good resources, and feel free to share it with all your friends, your family, your neighbors and whatnot, because you don't know, this might actually save someone's life. And I just want to say thank you guys for existing. Thank you to Level Up Bugcrowd for having me. This was awesome. And thank you all for being part of the community. I mean, the community has been a wonderful place. It's helped me. It's helped so many people I know. So thank you for existing. And if you need anything, you feel isolated, you feel alone, or you just need to talk to someone, my DMs are always open. So just please note that you're not by yourself ever.
It's a good note to end it on. Thank you so much, Chloe. So we do have and Sherlock potentially still there.
Sherlock left the room. She was like, and you're talking. I'm out.
Like,
peace.
Come on, Mom. All right, let's
I'm out.
Give me some food or something. So a question that came in. So how do we make positive changes to legislation, and what can we do to improve education among decision makers?
Ooh, this is a good question. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is talking with politicians to see how can we change this. And really, it's more of all of us pushing out there. We're talking to our friends, our family, people outside of infosec, because this is never going to go, like, politicians are not going to pay attention if we just talk about this in the community. We need to go outside the community. So having those conversations at your work, having these conversations with your friends, family, it's going to be really important, because we need all people to participate in this, because there's not too many people in the infosec community, so it's hard to get that message across too. So yes, and then also on the petition itself, you actually, every time that it's sent, it goes to certain assembly members as well. So that's the good news. The other thing is that once I get over 1,000 signatures, I can definitely push forward with changes. I used to work in politics. So when you get 1,000 signatures, then you get more people's attention. You get to like go visit the Congress people in their offices, or I guess virtual meetings. But that's the one thing, is that we need more and more people to sign this, and we need more organizations to know about it, so then we can get it going. But the petition is definitely the first step.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I would add to that some of the work that I and the Cavalry are doing. So Bo and those folk in DC, especially the Hackers on the Hill initiative. Basically, what they do. I'm not sure what the plan is for this year, obviously, because DEF CON is cancelled. Just got cancelled, and it's now actually cancelled for real. I just confused myself with that. But anyway, they get out there and do basically planned meetings with local state representatives from the House, and they go through basically a primer on like how to Capitol Hill good as the hacker. And really the idea of that is for it to be accessible to anyone. Like, you shouldn't necessarily need to be a seasoned political activist or someone who understands constitutional law to be able to make an impact in this. Like, if you're a citizen of a country that's thinking about this stuff, we're talking a lot about America right now, but this applies everywhere. So it's
the thing is, if the US changes their legislation, other countries will follow. That's usually how it goes, is one country makes the initiative and then it puts pressure on other countries. So we just need one country to care about us. That is all it will take to showcase that there are people listening. And I guess on a Capitol Hill, if you're in the US, or in other, I don't know, other hills in other countries.
There are other hills, so maybe we should try to take those as well. Maybe we can turn this into a giant kind of capture the flag of which group of hackers can be the first to convince their country to jump in the pool.
Yes,
I kind
exactly.
of like that as a closing note on this one. So thank you so much, Chloe.
No problem.
Luke, I'll hand it off to you.